Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Thursday, May 29th, 2025, and today we're going to talk about if wood chips can be contaminated, like compost can be contaminated, pests that refuse to be kept out, and buying the right broadfork. So let's do it. All right, well, welcome to Thursday, everyone. Second to last day of May as well, right? Maybe third to last. Almost June anyway. Almost technically summer as well. Almost warm too. The forecast is shifting in the direction of heat, I see, for next week, calling for like 90-ish degrees. That would be like 32 degrees Celsius. So that's about right on time, I suppose. It was another kind of rainy, cloudy, cool day yesterday, and I have to say there are a few things in the garden I can tell that are not super psyched about all the rain that we've had this month. In particular, I fear the potatoes are starting to revolt a bit, all of them, no matter how the bed was planted or which bed it was in or which treatment I used in terms of whether it was from cuttings or from the slips that I'm trying, all of it, not happy. I mean, to be fair, since they've been in the ground, which again, our ground being like very heavy clay, we've received a couple floods worth of rain, like 25 plus inches since they've been in the ground. And the rain just does not seem to want to stop. I've not seen but maybe 3 or 4 potato beetles in the last 4 years. But this year I'm actually seeing a little bit of larva and some flea beetle damage. And I attribute most of that very likely to all the water stress. Now, it could just be my luck has run out also, but the only real difference between this year and the last few has been rain. If it were a nutrient deficiency, I could do a foliar spray, but unending rain, well, that's just not super easy to treat. Anyway, we'll see how that shakes out in a few weeks or so, and when we start to harvest them, and I'll probably talk about it then, because failures, successes, it's all part of this farming gig. And I guess the content creation thing. Okay, so it is Thursday, and that is the day where we like to catch up on some of the Patreon questions so that I'm not answering May questions in August. That seems to be like, pretty good approach. Anyway, members can get questions in over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. And our first Patreon question of the day comes to us from Jesse Turretts, who writes, quote, "Hey, can arborist chips be contaminated with herbicides in the same way that compost can?" End quote. Great question, and part of me is surprised this hasn't actually come up earlier. So the question, just to flesh it out a bit more, is if wood chips could be contaminated with, say, an herbicide like compost can. And the answer is yes, it's technically possible, but it's not super likely unless you're getting the wood chips from a golf course or somewhere with a significant amount of turf management, or perhaps roadsides where herbicides are sprayed. There was a 2013 study that chipped trees that had been damaged by herbicide residue and found that the residue did seep into the soil and into tomatoes grown in that soil, but I want to emphasize the herbicide that was tested there or studied there, aminocyclopyrachlor, is no longer used on turf management as far as I know, or around crops. So it's not clear to me how common that particular one would be. In general, wood chips are not considered a likely source of contamination. Now, if you are getting those wood chips from, say, a conventional orchard, they will likely contain some amount of pesticides and fungicides, but the half-life on those is relatively short compared to some of the more harmful herbicides, meaning those chemicals do not last that long after they are sprayed, especially once they get into like a composting sort of breaking down situation like a big giant pile of wood chips. Most fungicides that have been sprayed on orchards that I'm aware of have a half-life of just like a few days or a few weeks tops. So by the time they reach your farm, the likelihood of having significant effects on soil or plant life, it's pretty low. If the wood chip provider tells you they just came over from a golf course or something, I would probably just let them compost for a while. The saprotrophic fungi that decompose wood chips have a great ability to deconstruct chemical residues. And this is where we get ideas like microremediation, where fungi could be employed to, for instance, help clean up chemical or oil spills. By and large, wood chips are one of the more reliable carbon sources out there in terms of their cleanliness. They are just not super likely to be contaminated. For me, a greater concern in terms of, I guess, quote unquote contamination might be poison ivy or poison oak. I'm not sure how long the oils that cause the irritation in those vines will stay viable, but I generally use gloves if I'm not certain of the source of the chips. Poison ivy is not fun. I mean, I don't get it that bad, but some of my family gets it pretty bad, so I try to not spread that if I can help it. Of course, if you have a bad experience with wood chips and contamination, let us know, and we can discuss that situation more tomorrow for Feedback Friday. Otherwise, great question. I'm kind of surprised we haven't talked about that more earlier. Anyway, we'll take a quick break, and when we return, some pests that just can't get the memo. BRB.
When everyone folds, your fork still holds. Your place.
Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Ring of Fire. What if you could turn your brush problem into black gold? The Ring of Fire Biochar Kiln is your spring tool for soil transformation, converting woody debris into high-quality biochar in just hours. Biochar will kickstart your compost, retain water and nutrients in your soil, and provide habitat for beneficial microbes. Now $19.95 with flat rate shipping. Their spring sale runs through June. Don't wait to boost your soil and optimize your inputs. Visit ringoffire.earth/growers now to learn more. Also, for more information on biochar, check out the No Till Market Garden podcast interview with Kelpie Wilson, inventor of the Ring of Fire kiln, that we will link in the show notes. Today's episode is also brought to you by FarmRaise. Still struggling with your balance sheet? Your lender's asking for a balance sheet and you're stuck with a spreadsheet mess or guessing your numbers? FarmRaise Tracks takes the stress out of farm finance. With one click, you can generate an accurate, up-to-date balance sheet that shows your assets, liabilities, and equity. No accounting degree required. You'll be ready for loan applications, tax season, or just a clearer picture of where your farm stands. Join thousands of farmers using Tracks to build stronger businesses. Get 20% off with code NOTIL20 at farmraise.com for the lifetime of your membership. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere the questions come in, but I will always get to those Patreon questions. Now, today's second Patreon question comes from Patreon member Adam Kinney, who writes, quote, I have several beds of romaine and buttercrunch under row cover. We have started to harvest both and have been finding both slugs and aphids on the heads of lettuce. I was thinking the row cover would eliminate this, but it has not. Any advice for preventing slugs? As a secondary question, our broccoli and cabbage are both under row cover and starting to grow into the row cover. I'd like to keep the row cover on as long as possible to help with bugs. We don't currently have insect cloth, and I was hoping to use row cover as insect cloth for as long as I can. How long can these crops be in contact with the row cover without creating a grow issue? End quote. Okay, so great. Thank you. A lot of fun questions here. So I have already done a few slug episodes that we will link in the show notes, but slug management really boils down to managing the environment and trapping the slugs. Those are kind of the two best options. In other words, keep the leaves as dry as possible, make sure your soil is operating at the highest level that you can, and use boards and beer traps to attract slugs and snails, etc., away from the crops. Then you can just kind of simply, remove the slugs from the garden by scraping them off of the board or chugging the beer. Kidding, just dump the beer out on an enemy. Row cover / insect netting alone will not always exclude those things. Aphids like squirrels and wind and American cheese are the absolute worst, and likewise will require a multi-pronged approach to deal with. I will at some point have an aphid expert on here to discuss more in depth what can be done to prevent aphids, but generally speaking, aphid management is about nutrient management and maybe even more so temperature management. Aphids are most abundant when air temps are relatively warm, but soil temps are still cool, like in the spring, or conversely, when soil temps are still warm, like in the fall, but air temps have started to drop, like somewhere around September, October here. So for that reason, you often see aphids the most in the spring and fall, and less so in the summer, in part based on the ambient temperatures and how that affects both plant and aphid biology. Aphids notably do tend to overwinter on plant debris, so make sure wherever you are planting, the plant debris is removed before covering that area with row cover so you don't inadvertently kind of lock them in with your plants. Also, of course, ants will bring aphids in to farm them, because we're not the only farmers on this property, as it turns out. For row cover, I would perhaps recommend adding it over top of the bed before you plant to start warming the soil. That may help prevent those aphids a little bit. That's anecdotal, but it could. Also, of course, with both ladybugs and slugs and pretty much all pests, you need some helpers. You need birds and beneficial insects. You need flowers to bring in those beneficials. This is partially why you tend to see more aphid damage inside of high tunnels than in the field. Natural predators are more able to keep them in check in the field than in a closed-off tunnel where they can't really access it either. In fact, one thing you could try on at least part of a lettuce crop is to take the row cover off the lettuce and see if better control is achieved with the aphids, because the insect netting will be keeping the good guys out as well. Like, they can't access the pests, they won't eat them. Now, to your question about contact with the row cover, well, that's generally up to you because cabbage and broccoli are not crops that require pollination. So long as the row cover is not too tight, they will produce a head whether they are covered or not.
unlike a fruiting crop. Like if you were covering your squash, for instance, you have to take that row cover off because at some point they're going to need pollinators to get in there and pollinate to create the squash. And cabbage worms can hatch in roughly a week. So if the crops are under, like a week from being harvested, you could take the row cover off, but the risk is there that the cabbage worms could spoil the party unless you're using Bacillus thuringiensis, which is a natural bacterium that helps explode worms. Yeah, or something like that. But if you just want to keep the row cover on and it was not too tight on the plants, they will still produce. One word of caution, though, when it comes to row cover, especially in the spring as it gets hot, that row cover will, or at least could, dramatically overheat those brassicas on warm days. Insect netting's biggest value, perhaps, is protecting the plants while not holding in too much heat, if any, just depending on the type of insect netting that you're using. So as it warms up, you may be without a choice but to remove the row cover, or the plants will just suffer. It may not affect the plant growth directly from them touching it, but just the heat that's trapped in there won't be great for them. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. Otherwise, let's take a quick break, shall we? And when we return, let's go broadfork shopping. Sounds like fun. Be right back. All right, so this is fun. There's this little edge of this garden spot right here that's got a bunch of stuff. It's got some chamomile and some flowering cilantro and some buttercup and all sorts of stuff. But the interesting thing is, there's all these little native bees. The thing they're loving the most is the grass flowers. They are all over them. Interesting.
Today's episode is brought to you by Farmhand. I started a CSA to grow food and build community, not to drown in admin work. Spreadsheets, emails, and pack lists take up too much time. If I could spend less time at my desk and more in the field, that'd be a win. Enter Farmhand. Farmhand automates billing, newsletters, websites, and member support, saving CSA farmers 20 plus hours a week. Focus on farming, not paperwork. See how Farmhand can help. Book a one-on-one demo with founder Ari at farmhand.partners/no-till. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. Today's episode is also brought to you by Precip. Precip is billed as the easiest way to keep track of rainfall, and that is true, but it is a lot more than that. Sure, you can open the app and immediately see accurate rainfall totals, but you can also save locations to see historical rainfall totals, wind speeds, and all sorts of other nerdy details. Their radar-based technology means you can ditch the rain gauge. I usually have to do that anyway because the kids find a way to smash it with a baseball bat. You can ditch the rain gauge and start tracking rain and other growing conditions all on your phone. Click the link in the show notes to find out more. All right, back to the show. All right, our third and final Patreon question of this Patreon Thursday is from, actually, I'm going to combine a couple questions here. The first one is from Lee Kossib, who writes, quote, best broadfork. In a video from a while back, Jackson raved about the meadow creature, still y'all's favorite, end quote. Okay, and with that question, of which is my favorite broadfork, I'm also going to include this question from Perfect Frog Name, who wrote, quote, so if our clay beds are mostly compact and it's either difficult to get the broadfork deep enough or each pull on the broadfork brings up one solid chunk, is that helping anything? Getting a late start this spring and for the first time used a BCS to try to reshape the beds and tilled the top 4 inches, still leaving the lower remaining bed seemingly solid clay. In the process of laying compost on top, not sure if we should then be broadforking or if we should have done something different, especially for tomatoes being our deepest planted crop, end quote. Okay, thanks you all for both of those questions. So the reason I combined these is because the answer to the first question also somewhat addresses the answer to the second question. So first, my favorite broadfork is currently the broadfork I got from Gulland Broadforks, Gulland, and in the name of full disclosure, they may have sent that to me or I bought it. I can't really remember. It's been several years, but it's nothing super fancy. There are several broadforks that sort of look like that, but what I like about it is that the tines are thin and cylindrical, but obviously very sturdy, and the broadfork is lightweight, but more importantly, perhaps now that we've moved to denser soils on this new farm, the flat tines of the meadow creature often grip the chunks of soil like you're talking about there, perhaps, Perfect Frog. And so you end up with a bit more disturbance than you might like because you pull up a rectangular cuboid of soil. In compacted soils that aren't quite as sticky as clay, I do actually really like the meadow creature because the weight of the actual fork itself, it's pretty heavy, 20 something pounds. It really sinks in well and efficiently to get deep and break up the compaction, but it will wear you out pulling it out. Especially in sticky soil, if you are having to stop every time to pull it back up and pop the chunks of soil out from between the tines.
It just takes a lot of work, but for really, really compacted soil, it's going to be better than most and more sturdy for the long haul. Now, I've not had any issues using the Golden, like the tines haven't bent or anything, but also if I'm breaking into some serious compaction, I do prefer the Meadow Creature just because I trust how sturdy that thing is. If I'm working on slightly looser soils, it's the Goland all day long, just because it's so lightweight and easy to use. So you do just have to figure out what type of soil and compaction you're dealing with and then go from there. I did one time bend the tines on a smaller broadfork once, trying to, broadfork some like pretty dense clay. That is not a job for thin tine broadforks. Like if you're trying to really break into hard soil, those are not the soil prep type broadforks. You need something that is more sturdy, like that Meadow Creature. And I haven't tried they do like single-handed forks where you do maybe just use one hand and 1 foot. Those could be really efficient, and especially on a smaller scale where you're just doing, maybe much smaller beds than we have. As for the other part of your question, Perfect Frog, that I will remind listeners was about in the process of laying compost on top of the new beds with heavy clay 4 inches down. They were not sure if they should then broadfork or if they should have done something different there. And well, what I would say is that if you have hard clay 4 inches down, you should still broadfork every bed until you don't have that hard pan anymore. That hard pan will cause just innumerable issues, even in a deep compost mulch system, if that's kind of what you're referring to. Go ahead and take care of it. Should you have done something different? Well, there are other ways to break into the soil that may have broken up that clay a little better from the beginning, like using a ripper or subsoiler, but that's what's done is done. And the good news is that it is fixable. It just may take a little bit of time and, of course, build a little muscle in the process. All right, I hope that was helpful, and we're going to call it a Thursday. Don't forget, No-Till Growers is now officially a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Please make sure to like and or subscribe and or follow wherever you are getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor this show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at no-tillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and the team at No-Till Growers. Also shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear.
For this night is over, I will cry.
Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or the Seed Farmer at no-tillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of, still May, still going, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Lucas Lucas, cool. All right, so it isn't long before the great expanding oasis becomes like an international phenomenon. It's all over the news. It isn't destructive, really. Sure, the new trees and grass gets in the way on dirt roads, and some vines cover some houses, and it gets in the way of some agriculture. But by and large, everything is just greening up. The desert is filling in. Mountains are becoming lush with plants. As herds of animals are starting to trail the front of the wave to nibble on the new growth, it's creating all this new life. You can see the growth from space. And so the cyclists, it's not moving so fast they can't keep up with it. So they kind of just decide to follow the Great Greening all the way across to the Mississippi River, where the Great Greening sort of crosses into Illinois, filling in fallow fields. Again, admittedly, a bit of a nuisance, but not terrible. Scientists rush to understand what in the world is going on. But the preliminary explanations amount to basically just like one giant shrug emoji. Ecologists note that the greening seems to be filling in spaces exactly as they were approximately 10,000 years earlier, which is pretty interesting. The plains are returning, the wetlands, the savannas, thousands and thousands of native shrubs have come back, and it lasts about a month. Then, that's for tomorrow on the Great Greening. I think that's the best name I've come up with this week, the Great Greening. Anyway, thanks for watching and or listening. We will finish that off tomorrow. Bye.
Going on now, it's the Memorial Day sale at Bray & Scarf. Now's your last chance to beat upcoming manufacturer price increases. Save up to 35% on select GE Profile and Cafe appliances. And save on in-stock GE refrigerators and best-selling washers and dryers. Plus, get next-day delivery, online delivery day tracking, and delivery day installation. Visit any of Bray & Scarf's convenient locations or shop online at brayandscarf.com, where it doesn't cost more to get more.